Today I'm going to be showing you a recipe for sandwich bread that's about half whole wheat flour. This recipe requires a food scale, as I do not provide volume measurements. Your wet ingredients are milk, I use oat milk, butter, and warm water. You'll need a microwave-safe bowl for those. Your dry ingredients are white all-purpose or bread flour, whole wheat flour, sugar, yeast, and salt. And you'll need a bowl for those. I'm using a stand mixer. Start off by placing 32 grams of butter in your microwave-safe bowl, and then microwave that for 30 seconds or until fully melted. And then add 100 grams of milk to the same bowl. I usually use soy or oat milk, but you can use whatever you like. And microwave this for 30 seconds until it's a bit warm. This will help the yeast activate faster later on. Now add 180 grams of warm water. In my case, I added a few extra grams of milk on accident, so I'm cutting back the water by a few grams to make up for that. Now for the dry ingredients, add 240 grams of white flour to your mixing bowl. Use a spoon to get precise amounts if needed. I got a lucky perfect pour here. Now add 160 grams of your whole wheat flour. This isn't technically 50% whole wheat by weight, but honestly this is the flavor that I found works the best over the years. In my case, I added 1 gram too much of the whole wheat flour, so I actually add a tiny splash of water to the wet ingredients to help make up for that. Now add 32 grams of sugar to your dry ingredients bowl. And then 8 grams of salt. And then finally 4 grams of yeast. The sugar, salt, and yeast don't need to be as precise as the flour and water, since those are the predominant drivers of your bread dough. Give the dry ingredients a quick stir, and give the wet ingredients a quick stir, and then pour the two together into the mixing bowl. Now mix these thoroughly until the dry ingredients are fully hydrated. This means about 1 minute on low in a stand mixer. After that 1 minute, the dough is fully incorporated, but it's quite weak. There's not a lot of gluten that's formed yet. So I'm going to let this sit for a minute and then come back and mix it again. After sitting for a minute, I come back and do another minute of mixing on low. If you're doing this by hand instead of with a stand mixer, this basically means that you're going to be flipping and rolling your dough over with your hands a bunch of times. After that minute or two of mixing on low, my dough is a lot stronger. You can see that it sticks to the hook better, but it's not quite fully formed, so I'm going to repeat the same process as last time. First letting it sit, and then mixing it one last time. Now for the final mix, I go 2 minutes on low. This really sets a strong gluten network that'll help the bread get beautiful lift later in the oven. Now pour some vegetable oil over your dough and cover it with a plate, letting it rise for about 2 hours or until doubled in size. This is my dough after 1 hour. It has not quite risen enough. After 2 hours, my dough has doubled and looks perfect. Now we prepare our pan for the final rise and baking. I thoroughly spread butter around the pan to prevent sticking, but you can also use a non-stick cooking spray if you find that more convenient. Now we're going to shape the dough for the pan. Start off by oiling or buttering your hands so the dough doesn't stick to you too badly. We're going to use our counter for shaping, and we don't want the dough to stick to that either, so pour some kind of vegetable oil, I use canola, and then spread it around there. Now set the dough on your oiled counter. We're going to be shaping the dough so it's about the same width as your pan. It's going to be a lot longer, stretching it out like I show here, and then we're going to roll it up so it fits properly in the pan. The most important thing is making sure that the width is right, so we don't have to scrunch it up too much when we set it in, or so that it's not so small that it doesn't take up the entire bottom of the pan. I can tell that mine is just a little wider than the pan, so I press in along the edges just a little bit to pull that back and make sure that it fits properly once rolled. Now grab either end and roll the dough into a log. You don't have to use a lot of force here, the dough will kind of stick to itself and make this easier for you. Unfortunately, my dough log is a little longer than my pan, so I start pressing it in a little bit to try to make the fit better. This isn't a big deal, and the dough will still cook up really well later on. And the last thing I do before putting the dough in the pan is pinch the seam closed. I don't think this makes that big of a difference, but it might help retain just a little more air and help the dough get a little more lift in the oven later. Now set your rolled dough into the pan. You'll see that my dough is a little too long and presses in on itself at some places, but this doesn't matter. The bake in the end is going to be perfect, as I'll show. We need to cover our dough and let it rise one last time. This is called proofing. In order to cover it effectively, I use saran wrap, which I cover in oil and then set on top. That way the dough doesn't stick if it rises and touches it. After 75 minutes, my dough has risen a lot, but it's not quite fully done. But now is the time to preheat my oven to 375 degrees Fahrenheit. After 30 more minutes, or just under 2 hours total, my dough has risen a lot. You can see that it's puffing up over the edges of the pan. It also holds an indent and feels soft when I poke it with my finger. Now it's ready to bake. I slide it into my 375 degree preheated oven for 15 minutes to start. At 15 minutes, I'm going to do a couple of things. I'm going to brush the top of the bread with some melted butter, and I'm going to cover it with some aluminum foil. I crinkle the foil so it folds over the pan a little better. Both of these keep the top of the bread soft and prevent it from burning. The butter also adds some good flavor. Be careful not to burn your hands when tinting the aluminum foil over the top. I'm pinching my edges so it stays on a little tighter, and then sliding the whole thing back into the oven with my oven mitts. After those 15 minutes covered in the oven, or 30 minutes total, my bread is done. The ideal final internal temperature is around 190 degrees Fahrenheit. You don't have to check this. If your bread looks like mine and it spent 30 minutes in the oven, it's probably good. I want to get my bread onto a wire rack so it cools without steaming and getting the crust soggy. I simply tilt and shake the pan a little bit and the loaf gently falls out. I then get it right side up and let it cool for about an hour. Here's a full spin to show that even though the dough didn't sit in the pan perfectly even, the bake is still really good. It's really smooth and it looks really pretty and kind of cute, to be honest. Letting the bread cool for an hour will prevent it from drying out quickly over the coming days. I give my bread its first slice and I'm amazed by this crumb. I mean, the insides are so even and they feel so soft. It's gonna taste amazing. I set out 3 slices, 2 for me and 1 for my girlfriend, each with some salted butter and some strawberry jam. This bread is so great. It has a fuller flavor than most sandwich bread because of the whole wheat and the butter, but it also has a light, soft chew because of the white flour and the effectiveness of the last rise and bake. This is the best sandwich loaf recipe that I found in my years of baking, and it goes well with almost anything, as the holder of PB&J or BLT, or as the side item and flavor sponge of a dish with marinade or flavorful remnants. It keeps for about 3 days in an airtight container, but it's best within a day or 2. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like. Also drop a comment below describing your experience with this recipe or what you want to see next.